Percy enjoyed working in the yard. Edward had taught him well, and he had the trucks and coaches in good order for the other engines. His bubbly nature was a welcome change from the yard's bad atmosphere. As Percy was shunting, he saw Thomas arrive with Annie and Clarabelle. He didn't take much notice at first, but when the guard's whistle blew, Percy was surprised to see Thomas backing the train down the branch line. When he next saw Thomas, the little green engine was most inquisitive. Asked Percy. Thomas was puzzled. Now Thomas is a unique engine. Thanks to special rods and connectors, he can be driven from Clarabelle's cab. This means he can stay at one end of his train for both journeys. Thomas smirked. Percy wondered aloud. Scoffed Thomas. And he left the station chuckling to himself. Percy was fuming. When the big engines were shut in the shed, Sir Topham Hatt asked Percy to look after the branch line. He exclaimed. He was excited to get out of the yard and to show Thomas a thing or two. Percy enjoyed working on the branch line, but soon found his hopes were dashed. His driver always ran him round to the back of the train. He tried starting before he could be uncoupled. He tried locking his brakes. He tried everything. But his driver always won in the end. He huffed. Time after time, Percy found himself grumbling running to the other end of the train. Clarabelle was always happy to see him. She smiled. Percy smiled, but still wanted a chance to show Thomas he was a special kind of engine. One morning, Percy brought the first train to the big station. He was about to run around for the return journey when the station master came running. He said to the driver, Percy was ecstatic. He beamed, said the driver sternly. Gulped Percy. As his driver strode to the cab, Percy chuckled. He whispered cheekily to Annie. Annie rolled her eyes. The fireman was anxious. Huffed the driver. Little did he know, a short distance was all trouble needed. Percy was enjoying himself immensely. He felt very clever. Percy's driver was having a hard time seeing. The guard was keeping watching Clarabelle, but Percy bumped about so much that he spilled his tea on his uniform. He fumed and went searching for a rag. That's when trouble appeared. At the first level crossing, a lorry had stalled on the line. Bertie was annoyed by the delay. He honked impatiently. The driver grunted at him as he continued working on the lorry's engine. Bertie rolled his eyes. Then he glanced down the line. A train was fast approaching. Bertie hollered, honking the horn madly. Clarabelle was frantic. She shrieked. The guard turned his attention back to the rails, scrambled to the lever. He leaned from a window and blew his whistle furiously. Percy's brakes came on at once. He put all his effort into stopping and shut his eyes in horror. When Percy opened his eyes, he came to a halt. Clarabelle's buffers were mere inches from the crossing gates. Scolded Bertie. Percy felt most ashamed. The driver was perplexed. Percy explained what happened, and the driver was in stitches. He laughed. Percy felt cross and foolish. When the lorry was clear of the crossing, he backed the train carefully to the first station. As he ran around the coaches, he thought about how silly he'd been. Smiled Clarabelle. She went on. Percy asked. Clarabelle laughed. Percy felt much better hearing this and laughed all the way to the top station as Clarabelle recounted Thomas's misfortunes. Percy had no further incidents and soon returned to shunting when the big engines were allowed out again. He was most cheeky whenever Thomas approached the platform. He called. Annie and Clarabelle were in hysterics. As Thomas turned bright red, he never mentioned being a special engine again.